All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for our Q&A session, featuring distinguished panel, including Mark Richards, Eoin Woods, Jacqui Read, and Diana Montalion. This is your final opportunity to seek clarification on any software architecture queries you may have. Don't let this chance slip away, so take advantage of their expertise that they're here, reunited in Barcelona, and ask questions in Q&A session. This is your last chance. So let's start. All right, so the first question is, what do you think? What will be the next most interesting movement in software architecture? Do you have a mic? Do you have a micro,
AI.
Diana?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
We're all telling each other that we're not going to say it depends on this panel.
No, I do not agree to this.
We're going to try at least. So one of the things which I'm absolutely fascinated about is architectural flexibility. We have so much change right now in our industry. Business is changing faster than ever because of increased competition in the market. Technology is changing faster than it ever has before. Teams are changing. Our deployment environments are changing. Our CI/CD pipelines are changing. I could list all of these changes, but there's numerous changes. And business is starting to get to the point now where it's actually able to pivot pretty quickly. And it turns out architecture is now the bottleneck. And I'm fascinated by this area of architecture, and specifically the investigation of something called residuality theory. And this is kind of one of the next things I'm seeing in software architecture. I spent about 20 plus years of my architectural career studying and analyzing and working on reactive architecture patterns. These are ones to basically create what are called autonomic systems. Systems that can configure themselves without human intervention, that can repair themselves without human intervention, self-protecting systems, self-scaling systems to deal with this kind of change. It was good experience, and these patterns do exist, but it's not quite enough. But residuality theory places a focus on the building blocks being what are called residuals, based on stressors that happen to a system. And it's quite fascinating. The more you put residuals as the building blocks of your architecture, the more it's able to adapt to stressors that are unknown. We just have too many unknowns. And so that combination is something that, and what was the original question? I'm just having fun talking.
So what do you think will be the next thing in software architecture?
Not that. No, I'm kidding. I think this will be the next thing. The future of software architecture will be to create architectures that are malleable, flexible, to be able to adapt to the ever-changing world we live in right now. Because we're not building buildings. Those are structures that are hard to change. We're building software. It should not be hard to change. So that would be my 2 cents.
For me, designing for emergence. So we have taken a very reductionistic approach, breaking things into parts and then building the parts. And I think that we're challenged to think about the patterns and the relationships between the software parts, between the infrastructure and which is software, and the software, which is software, and how people are using it, so that when we design software systems, we get more from those systems than any of the parts themselves could give us. And this is an area of exploration that is very nascent for us, and reality is forcing us to think of it. So as we are moving into almost all software is actually a system of interrelated parts that have relationships. How can we better design those relationships? Not simply what's inside the parts.
I'm going to do a bit of a politician thing and answer a slightly different question. So I want to answer the question, what isn't next? And I think that's AI, because there's a huge...
You said it. You said it.
Well, I'm saying no. I'm saying no. Because it's a huge bandwagon at the moment, and there are lots of companies who are just jumping on this and saying, oh, how can we use it? How can we use it? And I think at the moment it's best to just kind of sit back and say, okay, you make lots of mistakes and I'll learn from them. Thank you very much. So I think at the moment it's kind of this, the tech radars that we've talked about and things like that. I think it's kind of a hold and watch other people. I know that some people are looking into how we might be able to use things like ChatGPT to sort of analyze architectures and create kind of text-based sort of mermaid diagrams and things like that. And I think that's quite interesting if you want to have a play with that. But I think AI is not going to be in architecture, at least for a while.
I think that's fair. But actually, I do think AI is going to be important to architects in the very near future, because I think we are going to be expected implicitly to integrate AI models, not just large language models, but traditional models as well. And we're going to be expected to integrate AI services into our systems. And in some sense, that's someone else's problem, right? Because you'll have AI experts doing it for you, but actually becomes our problem because they'll affect the quality properties of the system. And in particular, working out whether a system is now fit for purpose, whether it's functionally correct, is much more difficult if you've got a significant AI component. So I think we do need to understand it to that level. And as our AI experts in Indava keep saying, large language models are great, but actually what's really great about them is they've got everyone talking about AI, and there's a lot of simpler models, which I think we are just going to have to start integrating in, because people will expect predictive models in their applications.
Well, it's interesting, because I agree with you, but I don't agree with you, Jacqui.
It wouldn't be
one
fun
of the
if you didn't.
difficulties in software architecture is this application of knowledge versus wisdom. That's the real dividing line when we talk about AI. Oh, I just said it, didn't I?
Yeah.
You definitely said it.
But, okay, so now we're in. Okay. But that's the real dividing line. Because, oh dear, and now I have to, because everything in software architecture is a trade-off. That's our first law of software architecture. So what we're looking at is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. Architecture requires wisdom. Now, in the past 6 months, I've been working a lot with specifically ChatGPT 4, sorry. And I was curious, could ChatGPT understand my architecture? And the reason I wanted it to try to understand my architecture was so that it could help me identify anti-patterns, known anti-patterns, identify bottlenecks, analyze risk associated with my solution based on probabilities. Those things seem viable in software architecture. Those would speed things up quite a bit. These are things an architect does. So it's interesting. The first task was, how do you get AI to understand your architecture? Well,
How do you get people to understand your architecture?
Oh, well, we should probably start. Well, listen, Diana, if we started there, then Jacqui's right. We'll never, ever, ever see AI in architecture, yes. But it has to be digitized. So I've all but abandoned a lot of the strict drawing tools. I do use C4, but I like freehand drawing. And I realized I can't do that anymore. If I want AI to know what my architecture is, I have to use an exportable machine reading format. And so I started to re-embrace Archimate from many, many years back. I started to re-embrace PlantUML, which I never cared for, and also Structurizer, which sits on top of C4. And draw my architecture, export that XML. And sure enough, it's quite amazing. I would import as a prompt my Archimate files and say, describe my software architecture to me as, let me do the prompt right, as a software architect, analyzing this architecture, comma, analyze and describe this architecture for me. And it was able to tell me all about my architecture, which was pretty cool. So I got as far as having it identify a bottleneck, which I fabricated in the architecture. However, its solution was exactly the opposite of the correct answer. So you're right, it's going to be a while, but I think it could be used really as a tool for us architects to help identify risks, bottlenecks, and anti-patterns that we have in our architectures.
I want to add a bit, regardless of our prognostication abilities here.
Prognostication, is that actually a word? Did you just make that up, Diana?
No, it's an actual word.
Somebody please look that up. I can't even say
We're playing
it.
Scrabble here.
Okay, all right.
So, thank you, Sonia.
It's a thing.
It's a word. It's a word. So regardless, if you're in the industry long enough, we're very trendy. We're like fashionistas. We are very trendy. Something is amazing, and then everyone hates it. Agile, for example, was like everyone went Agile. Now everybody tells me that Agile is responsible for climate change because it's like everything bad, right? And so I think that regardless, that's the cautionary aspect of this is that we do tend to get caught up. And that is not ideal. So some discernment, some wisdom brought to the tools, I think is really important, and especially when we're being asked all the time from the business side, but what about AI? Can we replace our entire development team if we use AI? Like having good answers to these questions that have a little wisdom in them, I think is going to be important until we actually know how this is going to help or not help.
Yeah, as you said, AI produces some very confident,
Jacqui, sorry, could you put a micro a little bit?
Yeah, okay. So yeah, AI produces some very confident, utter rubbish. So
I do know developers who describe architects as that as well, mind you.
yeah, yes, just like an architect. So
I was going to say, yeah, we have enough of that in the industry already.
Yeah.
Actually, we have received quite a lot of questions related to AI, and a lot of speakers say that it's too early to talk about it. Do you think that next year will be the right moment to discuss it? Do you think you will have content on that, or what are your predictions?
Yes, I do. I was actually planning on this year having a talk on how to leverage AI in software architecture. I could not make it happen yet. But I'm still plugging away, I'm still trying. I think as we're learning, it's funny I say this, as we're learning more about LLMs and how to correctly write prompts, I think that it will move forward fast enough too. I'm hoping to have a talk next year demonstrating the viability of being able to leverage this as a tool for us, not to replace us as architects, but as a helpful tool that we can actually leverage.
Let's do this. Talk accepted for the upcoming edition.
Oh, okay. All right. Now I really have to do my research.
Good luck.
Thank you. Hey, let's do a joint session on that.
Yeah, okay.
We'll stand on each side of the stage.
Yeah.
And I'll show you something and you're like, rubbish.
Yeah, that's rubbish.
Okay, let's move to the next question. How would you encourage developers to define and use metrics continuously?
I guess I could start at that one. I would suggest that it depends what you mean by metrics as to who they're for. But assuming it's the kind of holistic approach that I was pitching earlier, I think, at the start of most, well, we don't really have projects, but you know what I mean. Early on in the development life cycle, or when you've got major new features, you instinctively start thinking, what's the scalability characteristic? What is the performance? Is there a security angle to this? I think that's the time to start thinking, who's going to want to know what about this? And do we need to think about building in some measurement now, having gone to talk to the right stakeholders and worked out that it might be of value? That's where I think it sort of fits in. It's another quality attribute. So just as you don't pile money into security unless you've got a security requirement, you wouldn't just do metrics for the sake of it. But on the other hand, where you can see the need, there are stakeholders of some sort saying, I'll be wanting to know this, and make sure that I can see how this develops. That starts to trigger you thinking, I've got some quality attribute requirements for measurement here, and start integrating that into the work.
Yeah, I think I'd say, as Eoin was talking about earlier, about starting with the why rather than actually starting with the metrics. So your developers or whoever you're trying to convince that we need to do some monitoring or some observability or anything like that, you need to start with the why, and they're going to want to know why. In the same way people use ADRs to find out why, you need to start with that why. And once people understand why you're actually going to be doing it, then you can encourage them to actually implement it and use it themselves.
Yeah, an extension of that. So I was once in an architecture meeting, and one of the architects was saying, we need Kubernetes. And I said, why do we need Kubernetes? Legitimately asking. And he said, because we don't have Kubernetes. So this was really like, and I actually understand this to some extent, that we can have the most performant Kafka stream that was ever architected. We can terraform everything, but the outcome of our system design will be what people experience, right? Like, does this system serve its mission from people that have no idea how good or not the code is? And so for me, to what you're saying, Jacqui, the connecting the why, like why are we making this change to our system? So for example, does it need to be scalable? Does it need to be more performant? And what can we measure that proves this is well architected? And it usually isn't 5 nines. Like it sometimes is, sometimes speed is important, but this is about like really understanding the experience of the system and why you're doing it, and then wanting, I think of it as good defense. I want to prove that my system is incredibly well designed, and in order to do that, the metrics will help me to do that, and therefore I need to know what they are. But it isn't strictly the measuring, a performance. That's not the only, yeah.
So I trying to remember from the stats you had up there, I think it was 37% of the attendees were software developers, and 22% were software architects. And I'm hoping of those 22%, a majority of those still code as well. So inferring from that, we can assume that almost half of us here are developing production software. So I'm assuming, and I will also make the assumption, that last week you released some code into production, or at least committed to a Git repo. Did that software change you make impact the architecture? Can you guarantee that it didn't impact either the structure of that architecture, so it doesn't come crashing down like a bridge, or that it didn't impact any of the architectural characteristics that Eoin was mentioning? And working with that kind of collaboration, because the architect cannot be everywhere at the same time, it's kind of really standing on the shoulders of giants here with that why piece. In other words, that's a pretty valuable thing to know as a developer. Did I cause the system to come crashing down? That would be a good thing to know. So this kind of demonstration defeats discussion kind of point, really helps developers embrace these kind of metrics to say, yeah, you know, as a developer, as a responsible developer, I really am concerned that I'm not breaking something in the architecture I'm not aware of. And I think that's the other kind of conversation that you could have with developers, to have them continuously embrace metrics that matter. So yeah, it's kind of piggybacking on you guys. Yeah. That's why I let you guys go first. I wanted to stand on the shoulders of giants. I
like that phrase, metrics that matter.
Ooh, hey, I'm gonna create that URL, metrics.matter, metricsthatmatter.com, yes. I like that.
All right. So in your opinion, what are the soft skills needed to work as a software architect?
Ooh, can I start? May I start? I really,
Huge
really,
list.
really don't like that phrase. and be in part. So I think it's a really, really great question. You know, on the question, but one of the things that I have found over the last nearly 20 years is that what we call soft skills are the hard part. No offense to teaching architecture, the hard part, but I think what we call soft skills are often the hard part. And as a systems architect, they are critical, not just to my work, but for me to be able to get the right information with the teams and what we're building and have this good conversation. And so systems design is knowledge sharing. It's the design, the socio-technical design of information sharing between people that leads to information sharing within software. Software is knowledge. It's the embodiment, the physical embodiment of our knowledge. And so for me, these things that we've called soft skills are just architecture skills. And they are, you know, Conway saying that organizations who design systems are constrained to produce code that matches their structure. And I've seen this in code base after code. You can show me the code base and I can tell you which teams hate each other and whether or not product and tech get along. Like, you can see all of this in the code. And so I think that what I'd love to see is a lot more discussion about how there isn't really a division between hard skills, coding skills, and communication skills, because when you write code, you're speaking a language that we made up. Like, they're pretty, I think they're relatively inextricable. Inextricable enough for us to rethink our mental models, I think, yeah.
So who here is a software developer with a very loud voice? Anybody? Not you.
I can't hear anybody.
Mark, could you repeat the question?
It's because there are no Americans in the room, apparently.
Got it. Okay. Well, then I will have to pick on people and make up names. Okay. Soft skill. I know you don't like the word.
It's okay. We know what we mean by it, so cool.
I know. And it's funny, Neal and I always muse about this because we call them soft skills, but they're the hardest skills to acquire. So, okay, let's see. Sonia will be our developer. Okay.
Should explain worried about that.
So Sonia chooses to, and I'll give you my answer in about a minute here. Sonia chooses, she's writing code. She's a really, really good developer. She's writing code, and she realizes she's introducing a lot of cyclomatic complexity. A lot of if, then, if, then, if, then. And so she stops. And she removes all that and replaces all that code with the strategy design pattern to remove that cyclomatic complexity. Okay. Anybody here object to what Sonia did? Does anybody care? No. Steve in the front here happens to be the lead architect of our company. Now, Steve, unfortunately, is about to get fired from his job. You see, we just had a major security audit, and Steve is in charge of our customer management system and the corresponding customer database using that? Well, it turns out that the first thing that they found, which Steve, being the architect, is responsible for, is that all of you, in all these sections, are different systems that are all accessing that database freely. And there's some security information in there. The second reason Steve is about to get fired is because he, poor Steve. I hope that interview worked well, by the way. Second reason he's going to get fired is because we're not meeting our service level agreements in the customer area because all of you are using the customer database and using up all of its horsepower. And it's our application, it's our database. And the third reason is we're doing a major acquisition of another company. And the reason we acquired them is because they do customer management systems really well. But we have to make some major changes to all or most of our schemas. What do you all think about that last piece? Think about it. You're all accessing central customer database, and we need to change all of our schemas. No. So what does Steve do as the architect? He makes an architecture decision. We will use application silos. Now, what that means is only the owning application can access that data. All the rest of you have to call our system. And as a matter of fact, Steve says, I'm going to change the credentials in 2 weeks. Now, this is the customer management area right here. We're all happy because it fixes security. No one has direct access to that. You have to ask us. Let's see. We can change our schemas any which way we want to. And we've got total control of the horsepower of the database. What do all of you think about that simple architecture decision? You think, do you like it? Yes? No? Probably all of you, besides us, will give a thumbs down. You mean I have to ask you for all the customer analytical data through REST? We have to modify all of our systems? Folks, this is about €1 million decision. What's my point? Is anybody going to challenge Steve in his decision? Oh, yes, everybody is. Did anybody challenge Sonia in her decision? No. The key skill of a software architect is negotiation. Because almost every decision you make as a software architect will be challenged. It will be challenged by other architects who have other ideas of how to do this solution. It will be challenged by developers who don't agree with you, think there's a better way. It will be challenged by business stakeholders who don't want to pay for that kind of effort. Negotiation is one of the key skills of a software architect. When I was a developer, way back when, I still consider myself I still write code. I couldn't wait to be a software architect because then I could really make the good decisions. Folks, enjoy being a developer while you can. You have all the power in the world to rename methods, to change attributes, to split up classes, and no one is going to challenge you. We as architects can make suggestions, but rarely do we get to make decisions. So this is one of the key skills, soft skills of an architect.
Yeah, I'm going to reiterate that it's a hard skill, isn't it?
It is a very hard skill.
Hard skills. And in fact, actually, I think some soft skills, a lot of people can't actually learn. I think there are some people who just, it's going to be, incredibly difficult for some people. And so...
That's not true.
Nope. No, yeah?
No, it's not true.
Yeah. Well, they're the hardest skills to learn, and
No, they're not. Shh.
So I've heard this quite a bit from some people where they've been, in fact, I think it might have been Diana was telling me that when she's employed people, she's not looking for the people who've got all the technical skills. She's looking for people who have the soft skills, because she knows that they can pick up the technical skills quickly, whereas the soft skills is going to take a long time for people to be able to pick those up. And so you can only get to a certain level as a developer or an architect with the technical skills. At that point, you're just going to hit the ceiling if you do not have the soft skills, if you do not have the negotiation, if you do not have the communication. One of the other big things, apart from negotiation, is the communication of architecture, of all of our decisions. And I mean, that's why I kind of wrote a book on it, because I noticed that there was this gap between the technical and the communication, and people had all these technical skills. They could create these architectures which didn't turn into dumpster fires, but could they communicate that to somebody else? Could they then give that to a development team, and the development team produce what they'd actually designed? And that's normally the point where it does turn into that dumpster fire, because you're like, well, it wouldn't have if you followed what I designed, but you've not communicated it correctly. So if you don't want to hit that ceiling, you're going to have to invest in these soft skills.
Yeah. Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to completely agree. Major part of our training program is, in fact, language skills and soft skills, which are about communication, negotiation, also empathy and tact. I think both of those are quite important. I've found you spend a lot of your time saying no to people, so understanding how they're going to react to that beforehand is quite useful, and also being good at communicating in tactful ways is also, I think, saves a lot of confrontation.
And so architecture is about, it's less about the answers and it's more about the questions and how to ask questions. And you might have noticed here in the questions, you might have noticed in requests for comments, that we like to do things like, no, this is a bad idea. Or, does anyone have a question? I have a question. This is an architecture. Let's start with a question, ends with a question mark, or begins with a question mark, depending on what language you're in. And so a lot of the things we love, sharing opinions, 2 o'clock in the morning, and we're up fighting about how to manage configuration, like how to, right? I live for this, I love this, but that's not architecture. Opinion giving is not architecture. When you're making a recommendation, a systemic recommendation, there is a whole science to supporting your recommendation with sound, cohesive, and valid reasoning, with being able to structure inquiry. We don't know what to do, so how do we come to the best possible decision when there isn't a right answer? And this is so critical, this type of thinking, these type of structuring questions, that for me, if we just got good at acknowledging what someone was saying and then helping to strengthen the thinking, as opposed to no, wrong, bad, someone is wrong on the internet, fixing that, then we'd go a long way towards smoothing out the process of architecture. So I think we're all very much in agreement that there's no separation between this. There's no wall between the skills, and you can have one and not the other. In some circumstances, yes, but not for architecture.
That's right. We're in violent agreement. Diana came up with a most wonderful phrase earlier this afternoon. Opinion-driven architecture. I just love that. It is great.
You can register that URL as well.
What's that, Jacqui?
You're going to register the URL for that as well?
No, because I'm just trying to figure out, like, I'm trying to get my head around it. But I love it. I'm just trying to figure out how to leverage it. But I really love that phrase, touche.
Actually, we have a question regarding opinions. I really love this question personally. So, to whom do you ask for advice when you are stuck? Who's the Superman's hero?
That's a great question.
I really like that one. I'm going to say Mark and Sonia and Diana and Neal and Eoin. I go to lots of different places, and I think that's one of the key things, is that if you're only going to one particular person or one particular place, you're going to get one opinion. And we all know that if you put 2 software architects in a room, you'll get 3 opinions. So we need to go and find all the information from different places. So I think it's always key. Like they said, people, when we've been talking about ADRs, like, don't just put one option in there, otherwise what's the point? 2 options, you get a bit of a dilemma, and 3 options, you've actually then got some kind of choice. So vary your sources.
ChatGPT. No, just kidding. I love this. I love all the questions so far. They've been fantastic. I particularly love this one because it allows me to give all of you some really sound advice. Surround yourself with other experts. It's kind of like what Jacqui just said. You're at a software architecture conference. I'm hoping you're leveraging this really valuable and wonderful in-person experience to mill around outside, meet different people that you haven't met before, strike up some conversations and maybe some associations that can turn into something of a group. I don't know the word I'm trying to think of. But surround yourself with people that you trust their opinion on. I do this all the time because rarely do I actually have all the answers. I probably could say never. But a lot of times I may think this is a good idea, but there's no one else in my company to pass an idea off of. So, like Jacqui, I rely on my friends, on my colleagues, keeping non-disclosure into play, but just saying, hey, I've got this idea, mind if I pass it by you? Sure. And we chat and we talk. And so this is a really valuable piece of advice. Surround yourself with people. It doesn't have to be within your company, outside your company. And this is the way to grow.
I'm just going to add one little bit onto that. One thing, there's always trade-offs with these kind of things, as we always say in architecture. So if you do surround yourself with this trusted group, beware it can become an echo chamber where everybody starts agreeing with things. So always try and look for something else, for somebody else. One other person I do consult for advice is Steve, who happens to be my husband. And he's actually the one who's given me the most critical feedback on my book. So it can be useful to get the people who are close to you to get the feedback. But
that's the tip. If you're in doubt, ask Steve.
Yes. If you want
Steve.
Yes.
Can you give us all your email?
That is. So I want to plus one what's been said, but I want to give you some context for this first. So about 10 years ago, I was giving a talk at a conference about being lead engineer on a particularly challenging enterprise initiative. I showed code. I talked about how I brought down production once, because I feel like you're not really a grown-up until you bring down production once. All right. Yeah, right? So it was a very experiential talk. Afterwards, 4 people separately came up and asked me, so are you the project manager? This happened a lot. This is one example. So I have a sensitivity to not being technical enough, to having to prove that I have nothing against project managers, but that's a very busy project manager who's also lead engineer and producing the code and bringing down production. I've never worked in I mean, that's kind of a rock star. So when we're saying people we trust, and I really mean that, when I'm stuck, I go to people that I trust will help me get unstuck without me feeling like now I'm stupid or I'm embarrassed or I don't know or I don't have technical skills or I definitely have had imposter syndrome. And so the reason that I share this is that it's really important when we're the one people go to enabling them to not feel bad or wrong or for asking for help, that we want to encourage people to ask for help. And we don't want to think only junior developers ask for help. Everyone gets stuck. If you never get stuck, I would argue, work on harder things.
In fact, an important cultural point is if you're one of the really senior people, make sure you're seen asking for help. I frequently go and ask colleagues who don't happen to be at my grade level, but they know a lot more than I do. For example, I'm going to go back and ask advice for excellent question in my session about how do you make Prometheus-type systems resilient. I don't know, but hopefully I'll know by the end of next week, because I'm sure we have somebody who does. Because it just sends such a powerful signal that, humility is important, and this is the way we lead around here, and that people don't have more knowledge just because they're further up the org chart. That's a really powerful message.
All right. So next question. Are on-premise-based software architecture dead?
Oh, absolutely not. They're as dead as monolithic architectures are.
Actually, that was the next question.
Sorry. So I will skip that part. We'll just talk about on-prem systems. Okay. It's interesting. I work at a lot of companies that are actually on-prem. They do have some cloud presence, but not all cloud presence. And it's kind of interesting. Think about this question rhetorically, but I want you to think it in your mind, because most of you, I'm assuming, are in cloud-based deployments. Why did you move to the cloud? Kind of an interesting question, isn't it? I bet a majority of you say, I have no idea, or I was told we're moving to the cloud. It's very interesting. We are changing this finally, but the original premise to moving to the cloud was twofold, but it both had to do with cost. It was the fallacy that I could save money by moving to the cloud. But more to the point, cloud for CIOs, I'm anxious to hear your response to this. Cloud to CIOs and CTOs is an operational expenditure, whereas on-prem is capital expenditure. So I can move faster in cloud environments. It's kind of interesting. These were the original pieces. Now, what we've learned over time is that it is much more expensive in a lot of cases in cloud environments than it is on-prem. And I'm not going to use those two words, but I'm going to say what those two words depend on. It depends on, I did say that word, but I didn't say the two words in a sentence. But it depends on bandwidth utilization, CPU usage. It's not about storage anymore. That whole mechanical sympathy has completely changed around in cloud. But as I showed in my talk, that isomorphism matters even in that case. Because if those aren't our concerns, we should be moving back on-prem. And I'm seeing more so the hybrid kind of thing, where some systems are still on-prem, a few in cloud. Anyways.
I just want to quickly, because that's the only piece I wanted to add. It was a big surprise as a systems architect to know that I needed to know the difference between a capital investment and an operational investment. And if you don't know what that is, You will. It's a really big deal, and the influence it has over architectural decisions cannot really be underestimated. And if you can't, my thing is, if you can't explain your architectural decision when you're doing something big like a transformation to the accountant, you're screwed. Because if the accountant doesn't understand and can't translate for you, you're not going to get the money that you need to make this change. And so, and we don't want to go too far into it, but really, like, is it dead? It's definitely not dead from the business point of view, because their tax structuring for these investments is completely different depending on this decision. And for some businesses, this is really critical depending on how they've structured their economic situation, or basically, how do they plan to pay for it? And where's the budget coming from? And can they write it off? And when can they write it off? This actually matters like a lot.
Well, and just to kind of further one important point, because I have a feeling I left all of you like, what? You know, the main point of cloud is to move fast. Those of you who have been involved in procurements of a new virtual machine and all of the paperwork and time it takes know exactly what I'm talking about. Cloud doesn't necessarily save you money, but it does allow you to move fast. If you don't need to move fast, then why are we in the cloud? And so these are the kind of challenges, trade-offs that everybody's really facing, to trade off that cost, to be able to move fast, get things done.
Yeah, I think with cloud, in some ways it's mirrored kind of the microservice thing, where people have jumped into the cloud as people jumped into microservices, and then found that, as Mark was saying, that isomorphism didn't actually work. And I have heard of specific companies that have completely pulled out of the cloud and gone back to on-prem. And I suppose they've had to change the way they think about the financial aspects of that. But they've sort of realized, wow, this is expensive. And I'm pretty sure the cloud companies probably thought, oh, great, everyone's moving to the cloud. How can we get more money out of this? How can we make some odd little charges? So a lot of it is all about, oh, this times that, and and when you use up all these data units, you think, what's a data unit?
Data egress fees.
Yeah, and you think, oh, it's 0.002 pence. Oh, it'll be fine. And then you get this huge bill, and then you find that somebody's left something running somewhere. And so I certainly don't think it's dead. And I think there probably will be more people who, if they don't pull completely out of the cloud, they will pull some things back out of the cloud, because they will have this realization that you don't get that isomorphic fit.
Okay. And you want to add?
I didn't have a lot to add. That's the problem with being on a panel with experts. They just answer all the questions. I mean, in summary, there are some really cloud-unfriendly workloads. You know what they are. If you've got a massive memory footprint and it's very long-lived, I mean, that's really expensive to run. I've got a couple of clients at the moment who are in exactly that position, where they're software vendors, and actually their clients want them to go to the cloud, and they're trying to explain to their clients how much it's going to cost to run. So there are some really cloud-unfriendly workloads. But honestly, I think for most people, most of the time, if you're not a corner case like Dropbox, actually the cloud today makes sense for most people, and in general it's getting better. The thing that I think is really interesting to watch the next couple of years is as the cloud vendors get more pricing power, because people realize it's quite hard to move workloads across clouds, how they're going to react to that, and whether they're going to do what Amazon have historically done, which is eat themselves and just keep driving prices down, or whether they're going to start behaving more like monopolists and driving prices up, and then there'll be all kinds of regulatory investigation. I think that will be really interesting to watch.
Ooh, that's a really good point. Last week, did Amazon acquire your competition? Think about that. If you're using AWS and all of a sudden they acquire your competition, that's kind of a business problem. That's a conflict of interest. And you are exactly right, touche. Migrating off of that to another cloud is not a trivial task.
Oh no, it's cloud agnostic. We built everything cloud agnostic.
Oh, now stop.
Yeah, we want it cloud agnostic.
It's just like Java runs everywhere, right?
As Nate
isn't
said,
that
we got
funny?
it right this time.
Polycloud showed up on the ThoughtWorks technology radar about 5 years ago, and it sort of disappeared. You're kind of right. That's kind of interesting. I'm not sure why, but it did. Yep.
Maybe it's because if you put stuff into a cloud, you don't have to pay. If you take it out, that's when you have to pay. So that's when transferring between clouds. Thank you very much.
All right, next question. Which are the trade-offs of using a shared cache to help limit direct synchronous RPC communication between microservices?
Oh, fantastic. It's got me all choked up. Thank you, whoever asked that question, because you recognized that my statement during the Q&A of my talk never mentioned the trade-offs. So that's awesome. Yeah, there are trade-offs. I spoke about, I was using an example of a gentleman in the very, very, very back, and this gentleman here needing his data. And he had to make a synchronous call. And how do we avoid, how do we limit those things? And I had mentioned the use of an in-memory replicated cache. And in fact, it does remove that dependency for that service, with one exception. The trade-offs, first, we have a cold start dependency. So that service who owns the cache has to start up before I'm operational. Now, we could start up in any order, but there is that cold start dependency. That's one trade-off. More to the point, how do you take 4.5 gigabytes of product descriptions and put them in an in-memory cache? You don't. So we start to see the first trade-off, which is data volume. In order for these tools like Hazelcast and Ignite, Gemfire, Coherence, and Finispan to do this synchronization behind the scenes so that we're all in sync with the data, that's called replication latency. The amount of time it takes these tools to transfer the updates over to all of the in-memory caches. But if your update rate is faster than that replication latency, it won't work. Not only will you get data collisions where you're overlaying each other's data, you'll never have the right number. And so inventory is a great example of this, something that is just not well suited for this kind of problem. Let's see, eventual consistency is another trade-off, because although it takes only about 10 to 100 milliseconds for me to receive all those updates or inserts, for 1/10 of a second, I've got the wrong data. So even though it's fast, it's still eventually consistent. These are the four main trade-offs of leveraging kind of in-memory data grids, in-memory caching, to solve that problem of synchronous calls. There is an alternative, though, and that's to use a distributed cache as a data sidecar. Because with a distributed cache, you have to go out to the cache to get the data. You might say, but Mark, I'm still making a synchronous call. It just happens to be to a cache server rather than the service itself. Here is why this is such an amazing, I call it a data sidecar, not to be confused with the data sidecar in a service mesh. But it's like an Envoy, a service mesh sidecar. So, can you imagine, I'm up here at the panel. I'm trying to answer a question. And the restroom's on the other side to the right. Yep, thanks. Anyways, so I'm trying to answer. The restroom's downstairs, right in front of this door here. So as I'm trying to talk to all of you, which is our north-south, the restroom is baño to the left. Do you see what's happening? I'm trying to communicate with all of you. You're the user interface. I'm the service. But what's happening? Everybody wants my information, where the bathroom is, where the toilet is. So, imagine, if you will, I don't get interrupted anymore because Diana here is going to be my data sidecar. Now, she's in my bounded context, so I'm the only one who can write to that cache.
What's my time to live?
As much as you want, Diana. Yes. Hopefully a long, 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 healthy, and happy life. But do you see, all of you that were asking where the toilet is now getting that information.
Oh, thanks.
Directly from Diana. And now I can talk to you uninterrupted. It's a great alternative to that in-memory data grid because none of you are making synchronous calls to me. So if I go down, Diana's still here. She's still hanging here. Oh, now you go down, and now we have problems. That's the trade-off, everyone. Fault tolerance. So those are yet another alternative. But again, thank you for that question because there are trade-offs to those kind of solutions.
There is one more actually related to microservice.
The data sidecar wants to talk.
Yeah, the restroom is. So I love this question. If that's I love this question. So after like nearly a decade of varnish is my enemy for the rest of my varnish. The first time that we moved towards architecting a multi-platform distributed system, microservices, blah, 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 well, we made it performant through multi-layer caching, right? Caching, and we had a strategy about, how to cache clear TTL. Then there came the day that there was a bug, and we didn't know where the bug was. So, basically, the moral of this story is listen to Eoin. Like, had we been smarter at the time to understand that caching was not going to, it was the nemesis. It was going to become even more of a challenge for us. We would have designed more, not just metrics, but that also understand that cache clearing, cache changing, the performance of caching across a system was actually really, really important to have a good strategy for. So for me, a caching strategy is one of the first things actually that I want to see, right? Because that's where you can really get, a drama. Last piece, my treadmill was having trouble, the application running the treadmill, and I got customer service on the phone. They had me clear the cache, and it was fine. So it's everything.
That reminds me, Diana, what are the two hardest things in computer science? Bingo. Cache invalidation, naming things. And off by one errors.
I love that joke.
It's my favorite joke in the world. And I tell it at least once a day, and no one laughs.
Great joke.
I know. However, who here remembers the first lesson learned from this morning's session?
Did you really want to ask that question?
Was it don't use microservices, they don't work?
No, that was the
Ever?
fake one. That was the fake lesson, yes. No, the first lesson was pay attention to and observe the physical bounded context. So, both of those caching options I talked about in microservices to remove these synchronous calls and this service coupling, you don't have to worry about cache invalidation. It doesn't exist in either of those options. Why? So I'm going to pick on Steve again. So Steve's our catalog service. Steve is the microservice that manages all of our products that we sell. I am the wish list service. But I happen to need the product description. I don't have it. Steve has it. So I have an in-memory data grid. Steve owns the cache. Every time he gets a new product or changes it, it comes to me. I have all the product descriptions in memory. They're right in here. Steve walks out of the room. My cache will always and forever equal that database. Why? The bounded context. Who is the only single person who can write to that database? Single only one. Raise your hand, Steve. Steve. And he's not available. That's why it works. Whether it's a distributed cache or an in-memory cache, it will always be in sync with that database. That's an awesome thing. So yes,
Steve
so
is also the project manager.
Oh, right, yes. Well, now, there might be project managers out there.
No, I mean this in a good way. Like, Steve has done everything, and he's also the project
Oh,
manager.
that. I thought you were making fun of project managers.
No, he's also the project manager. Yeah, he's all of the things.
Okay, Mari. So how to reduce new microservice creation overhead?
Oh, microservices 101 here. Boy, oh boy. I feel like this is the fitness function question of yesterday's panel. So how to reduce the creation of microservices and its overhead. I'm going to make the assumption that you're referring more to serverless functions as opposed to containerized microservices. But the answer applies to both. And there are a couple of techniques. There's a lot of techniques. A couple I have leveraged. First, as you remember, I mentioned size is actually important in microservices. The larger the size of a service, what it does, the longer it's going to take to start up. That, by the way, thank you, whomever asked that question, is yet another granularity disintegrator. Startup time. Exactly. This is a very large customer management system. How long is that going to take to start up? About 12 minutes. But over here is a single-purpose service, 400 milliseconds. Yeah, it's about what it does, its size. Another technique that I've leveraged is also internal threading or internal messaging. Start that service up as fast as possible and play the game that we do in user interfaces, that first contextual paint. What you see on that screen is not done yet. You get to see it. So I apply that same thing to services, components, microservices, to be able to start it up and then multi-thread the rest of whatever I need to do. Object instantiations, connections to external sources, third-party systems or services. All of those run in threads. And so that is yet another trick to kind of reduce this nasty startup time, especially in serverless functions.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to do the architect thing and actually ask a question and say, do you really want to minimize the amount of time it takes to spin up something new in production? If you think about what Nicholas said earlier, they optimized for getting things into production, and they didn't think, oh, how are we going to get stuff out of production or detect what's sitting in your cloud, as we were talking about earlier, using up all of your data credits or whatever it is. So think about, do you really want to optimize for it? And if you do, then maybe you need to optimize for shutting things down as well.
Okay, next question. Speaking of Agile, what are your thoughts on the Agile fluency model as described by James Shore in the book, The Art of Agile Development? The industry seems to be very focused on Scrum and Scrum-like methodologies, which are not quite Agile in their original meaning. The Agile Fluency model addresses almost all deficits of Scrum and Scrum-alike methodologies. So what are your thoughts on this?
Oh, how much time do we have?
Well, we do a lot of Agile delivery. I think we're quite opinionated about it, but we get a lot of benefit from it. Honestly, we don't really care whether people think we're Agile or not, but customers normally tell us how responsive we are to change, which after all is what we're trying to do. I do observe that there's a lot of hate for Scrum, and then like on HackerRank or somewhere, and I follow the thread, and then someone describes what Scrum is, and it's totally unfamiliar to me. And I'm a bit perplexed, is that I think a lot of people have read a cheat sheet and then gone off and tried to do it. And at the other end, I think a lot of people have, dare I say its name, a lot of people have been trained in, how would I put it, quite heavyweight Agile methods. I won't name it, but you know which one I mean. And I think they come out very, how would I put it, very rule-based, that there's one way of doing it. Whereas actually the whole principle is you've got to optimize what you're doing for your situation. And so I'm a bit puzzled by the current Agile is dead, Agile's on fire, it'll never work. But then when I dig into it, I find those people don't seem to be doing anything I would recognize as Agile, having done it for about 15, 20 years. So that's my experience.
So same, in the last 2 weeks, I've given a talk 3 times, and it has been this, that people say Agile is dead. So part of the challenge is we're very trendy. Part of it is the straw man argument. When I ask people, they also, architect is a bullshit role. Those 2 things come up a lot. But when I dive in and ask people about their experience, it's horrible. I would hate it too. But for me, neither describes agility nor architecture. So we kind of build a worst case scenario straw man and then use the pitchfork of our opinions to keep arguing about it. For me, my early years were very high-performant agile teams, and there were qualities that we had, regardless of whether you call it Scrum or call it this, the respect for each other's leadership, the ability to work cross-functionally, the ability to not know the right answer and still work in partnership with skills. So I'm terrible at design, for example, and so partnering with someone with design skills to improve my visual communication. A story that I tell is the product owner wanted to build a new feature on the new platform and did not want users to have to waste the time verifying their email address. And I'm like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. But it wasn't my decision. So that's what we built. It was exactly what you might expect. A few months later, same product owner is saying, Diana, do you need to do performance testing before you push this to production? Nope. Are you sure? Absolutely. I just changed one query and wrote some code. It's not a thing. Would you bet my career on it? Sure. It's not my fault. There was a bug in the MySQL max function that is not, so I use the max function, but it was you can Google it, it was really real. Had we done performance testing, we probably would have found it. Point was, it was my decision. It was my decision to make. It was our decision, the engineering team's decision, and we fixed it, just like it was his decision about the email, and he had to put more stories on the backlog. So my point is just that the qualities of thinking and communication that I experienced on very high-performance, self-organizing, learning-driven agile teams are critical to systems architecture. They often overlap. And I've never met anybody with those qualities who wasn't also good at building tech, like good at thinking through problems, good at learning new skills. But I met a lot of people without those, who are very good at building tech without those qualities, and it makes it hard to do things together. So I think, I did not read the book that you're mentioning, so now I'm curious to look it up. And I don't know Agile dead. It's not a method of control, and we're using it as a management tool. This is not the point. But last week when I spoke about this at the Agile Meets Architecture conference, Dave Thomas, who was one of the original writers of the Agile Manifesto, who I quoted when I said Agile was dead, came up and said, you know, the challenge is exactly what Eoin is saying, that people are using it as an implement of control, as a management tool, in all kinds of ways it was not intended to, but also it solved a problem that was pervasive at the time, that in some ways has improved, so we need to evolve what we mean when we say Agile. We need to evolve it so that it suits the challenges that we have today, and that's okay. It's okay that it changes, but it's not okay that we think Agile equals Jira.
I like what you said about the whole story when you went in. It's like, I don't even know what this is. I don't quite get hung up on the term, whether we call it Agile, whether we call it Scrum. The key point is this: do you, or let me rephrase that, are you empowered to be able to change the process to do what works for you? Because that is one of the premises of Agile. Whatever you call it, it's to be able to do what works for the team. And it's interesting, we have all these flavors of Agile. If you call it Lean, we call it Kanban, we have Scrum, we have, I'm not going to say that. I'm not going to say it, I didn't. We have Agile. I almost said a very nasty word. But I keep coming back to this importance of isomorphism. Because Agile was meant to empower teams. But if I have a staff of 15 junior developers who are unaware of the problem domain, new to the business, they need much more guidance and leadership and direction than mid-tier and senior developers who really have the attitude of, please leave me alone and let us get our job done. Those are two different shapes of teams. And the methodology is critical. It also has a shape to match those team topologies. And so there was a book that Amal showed up on the screen, Team Topologies. Really, in my humble opinion, kind of a required read, not only as an architect, but just in our industry. It really is enlightening to how influential team structure and communication is to all the stuff we're talking about.
One of my favorite quotes of all time, sorry, it made me think, one of my favorite quotes of all time, that Agile was invented because reality refuses to bow down to power.
I like that one. And I haven't heard of that book either, but I think I'm going to look it up because it sounds quite interesting.
Yeah, thoroughly recommended. Yeah.
So when I think of Agile, I always think of two different forms of Agile. There's the Agile with a capital A, which is sort of the heavyweight, and then there's the Agile with the lowercase a. And if anyone ever looks in the index of my book, it's not an errata when there's an Agile with a lowercase a and a load of stuff, and then an Agile with a uppercase A, because that's what O'Reilly do. But outside of O'Reilly, I always think of them as these two sort of as the capital and the lowercase. And I think the people who are doing the sort of what I think of as the lowercase are the people who are actually working in an Agile way. They're not saying everybody in this company must do Scrum or something like that. As Mark was just saying, it's the ability to change things, to improve things. And if you've got somebody saying, we have 12 teams and they are all going to do Scrum and they are going to have sprints that are 2 weeks and they are going to have all of these different ceremonies, that's not Agile, because people do not have the ability to change things themselves. Excuse me. So I'm going to have a look at that book because that sounds interesting. But yeah, agile doesn't always mean agile. And what you were saying about agile is dead, maybe we should say agile is dead, long live agile. Yeah.
There you go. Woo-hoo!
All right. Could you recommend any book about negotiation?
Oh, sure. So it's interesting. I know of no books that have the word negotiation in them that I have or probably would read. So how can I recommend a book about negotiation? Sorry, I have to use the words. Negotiation, the art of negotiation, is all about people skills, soft skills. And so one book I would highly recommend in this is a book by Colin Powell called My American Journey. Colin Powell was the Secretary of State. He was also a general in the United States. And this book, I think, this book for me really opened my eyes to the qualities of leadership and people skills. It's amazing. But it's really honing those kind of people skills. That's how you negotiate with people. Oh, there are a lot of other kinds of these negotiation tips. Not that you would be a car salesman or a business negotiator settling an acquisition or something. No, I'm trying to get your buy-in. That's the kind of negotiation a software architect does, getting buy-in. Simple, basic people skills. Any book that outlines these kind of things is going to help you in negotiation. Using a person's name. People love having their name said. Just make sure you pronounce it right. I've had a lot of really bad lessons learned about that. So DDD is another tip I can give you. Demonstration defeats discussion. We can talk all day and never get anywhere. But if I can show you graphically, through metrics, through measurements, demonstrate the problem, it's kind of hard to refute that. So these are just some of, think about just the basic human people kind of skills, and that's what will get you on the road to being a really great negotiator.
I'm going to go off-piste a bit here, and it's not negotiation. It's the process of coming to an understanding, and that I call it systemic reasoning, but it's also argumentation, which is different than rhetoric. So there's a really good, great course on argumentation. It's taught a professor. And the thing about argumentation is it shifts from yes, no, right, wrong, and it focuses on the ability to construct thinking well with other people. And so it's not negotiation in that it's not transactional. It's interactive and supportive, and it's foundational to systems. The other thing is, if you ever get a chance to do improvisational comedy, I encourage you to take it in a safe, because the way that an improv team works very much works well for a high-performing development team. Their skills overlap an awful lot. So, plus it's fun.
I haven't got any specific books on negotiation, but communication is a huge part of that negotiation. And so those are going to be the kind of skills that you're going to look for. And I can't necessarily
recommend your book?
Yes.
Communication
We recommend
patterns.
her book.
Thank you, because I couldn't really recommend my own book. But yes, it's called Communication Patterns, so it's probably going to be useful in some of the negotiation you want.
All right, thank you very much for participating in our panel discussion. It was very insightful, and some of you we will see tomorrow. And thank you very much for making it to GSAS23. It was a big, big pleasure. Thank you.